Good morning to you. And right now, prosecutors in the court-martial of the accused Fort Hood shooter, Nidal Hasan, are now trying to convince a judge to allow evidence of his alleged interest in jihad. That's something we've talked about an awful lot here. Hasan already telling jurors that he was a soldier who, quote, switched sides. Prosecutors expected to rest their case sometime this week. Hasan could face the death penalty if he's convicted of premeditated murder. So let's talk about this with Philip Snyder, a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, and also Dan Schorr, who is a former prosecutor. Dan, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about that evidence that the prosecution wants included. Basically, they will also want to include that he wrote these papers while he was down at Walter Reed, saying that he sympathized with suicide bombings. He had apparently researched online jihad Muslims just hours before that shooting. So do you think that the judge, Dan, will allow this in?
They'll probably allow some of it in. Remember, the defense is not contesting any of this. The defendant actually wanted to raise a defense of others' defense, which would say he was killing these Americans to protect the Taliban. So he's not saying he wasn't into jihad. The question here is you have to weigh the probative value for the prosecution to show motive, which is an important part of the prosecution, versus the prejudicial effect. If they have too much evidence of jihad, would it just inflame the emotions of the jury and not be relevant to the actual motive? So there'll probably be a balancing decision by the judge, and some of it should come in.
Boy, it sure seems relevant, though. Phil, what do you think the judge will do?
I think Dan made an excellent point. It really comes down to whether the probative value outweighs the prejudicial value, because in this case, the government wants it in and the defense wants it in. I think that the judge will weigh a balance, and if the judge limits how much comes in, it's going to be because of an appeal. They want to make sure there's no appealable issues that come back. Yeah,
that's a really fine line, and as you mentioned, the appeal would obviously be a big concern. It seems that he really wants the death penalty. He wants to go out of this a martyr, and his defense, of course, is frustrated by that because he supposedly has to mount some sort of a defense here. His attorney is now asking an appeals court to step in. Dan, let's start with you. What do you think is going to happen with that? What might the appeals court do?
I think the trial judge was right to tell the standby attorneys that they have to stay on the case. The attorneys are saying we can't assist the defendant at all because he just wants to die and he wants to be found guilty. So they're saying ethically they can't be part of the defense. But the judge is saying you're a standby attorney. You're there to advise him on strategy and the law if he wants it. It's very important in order to preserve his rights and to prevent an appeal that could reverse a conviction.
All right. Phil, so if this evidence of jihad is actually allowed into the case, I'm wondering what that would mean for the victims' claims that this is terrorism and that it isn't an act of workplace violence. What is that going to end up meaning for them, if anything?
I think it's important to the victims that that evidence comes in. They want to say that man is a terrorist, he should be treated like a terrorist, and our family members did not die in vain. The reality, though, is that whether that evidence comes in or not, he's going to be found guilty, and they are going to have some solace in their heart that that man is not going to walk out of there ever again.
Well, we'll see if they change that designation from workplace violence to terrorism, obviously a big issue. We've got another case to talk with you guys about, that murder case that's making headlines around the world. Oscar Pistorius was indicted earlier today in South Africa on a more serious charge of murdering his girlfriend with actually the intent to kill. So now the case goes to a higher court, and just to lay out the case for folks, prosecutors are claiming that Pistorius shot his model girlfriend in the early morning hours Valentine's Day after the couple apparently had some sort of argument. They say that the evidence will show it was premeditated murder. So, Dan, what is the strongest piece of evidence that you see in this so far?
Well, the strongest piece of evidence is that he got up in the middle of the night and took a loaded gun and fired into a locked bathroom door, killing his girlfriend. We know he's the shooter. We know he intended to fire at the person in there. His story is that he thought his girlfriend was in bed and he somehow didn't even check to see if she was really there and just fired into the bathroom. It defies common sense, and the prosecution is saying that even if he did intend to kill a so-called intruder, it's still an unjustified intentional murder, and you could transfer that intent to killing his girlfriend. So either way, it's a very strong case for the prosecution.
Phil, our reporter Amy Kellogg has been following this, and she talked about how he could get off with just community service. Could you explain how that works?
I don't know how that's going to happen. If he's convicted of murder, he's not getting community service. But to point out Dan's point that defies common sense, here's what defies common sense. People who are dating lingerie models do not intentionally murder them. That defies common sense. I think that motive is going to be a big problem in this case because just from common sense standpoints, people do not kill lingerie models.
Well, okay, I appreciate your humor there, but a young
that's
lady
an absurd statement.
lost her life there, and obviously this is a tough day for her family. Phil Snyder and Dan Schorr, thank you very much. It would have been her 30th birthday today, so we'll keep following this case as it goes along.
That's a very strange one.